Hey guys, it's Holly. Welcome back to the channel. So tonight I am doing a video on biblical characters and anxiety and kind of a little bit about who dealt with anxiety in the Bible. And I did one of these videos on depression recently on biblical characters who struggled with depression, aka really intense grief, emotion, sadness, etc. And so I really felt like this would be beneficial. Now, I will say I did not find quite really as much information at all on anxiety as I did on depression. And I also looked up a little bit of information on things like bipolar, things like borderline personality disorder, like anything I could potentially possibly find that's, mental, emotional related is what I tried to look for. And so I also tried to look for examples of schizophrenia. And I honestly did not find a lot of information on any of this stuff, but I'll tell you what I did find is a ton of information on depression and a little bit of anxiety, but primarily depression. And I do want to point out that I feel like that really shows us a lot, whether you believe the Bible or not. I feel like it really points out that depression was extremely common in biblical times. And I feel like it's really laying out for us that, hey, this is normal and this is something that almost everybody goes through at some point. And so, like I've said in so many of my other videos, I don't feel that anxiety and depression should be labeled as mental illness for the most part. I believe that makes it makes it more problematic, and I believe that it sends people messages, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, subliminally, sends people the message that something is wrong with them because they are experiencing some excessive stress in their life, or they're experiencing uneasiness, nervousness, they're experiencing sadness, grief, loneliness, hopelessness, helplessness. And I really feel that the Bible lays out that these things are a part of life, and it's just yet another reason why I don't feel that we should label people as having mental illness or being mentally ill because they're dealing with emotion. So, without further ado, I'm going to share with you guys my findings, and like I say, I did not find a ton, but I'm going to share with you what I did find. So, just bear with me because I've got my phone here and I'm looking up some information for you. So, I'm actually going to start with what I looked at in terms of personality disorders of any sort, and the only thing that I really found is in terms of Samson. And so Samson was the Israelite hero and judge who was undone by the temptress Delilah, exhibited almost all the symptoms of a person with antisocial personality disorder, known in the psychology trade as ASPD. Now, Samson was some people believe that he was a sociopath, which can mean a few different things. But basically, it's widely agreed that Samson was essentially just weak, and essentially he was just not good, essentially. But he was basically just very narcissistic ultimately. And so that's what a lot of people believe in terms of Samson, that he could have potentially had some kind of personality disorder. He was antisocial, and that he could have been narcissistic, could have been a sociopath, but he was essentially very, very physically strong. But anyways, long story short, so, again, I don't necessarily agree with labeling things such as antisocial personality disorder. I think in terms of our mental state, certain symptoms that we may mentally exhibit, I really feel are just simply coping mechanisms. I don't think, and this is just my take, I'm certainly not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I do like to share my opinions on these things because I feel like my unorthodox views can be very beneficial to a lot of people, because I know it has been to me and it has been to a lot of people that I've shared this with. And I do have people reach out to me on a pretty regular basis, and they're, saying that this, has really helped them. And just basically me taking a different stance. And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people that will take a different stance on mental health and wellness. And, and there are a lot of people that actually believe that the mental illness is actually an illusion, and it's actually just simply you seeing the world for what it really is. So, I really just believe, like I've said before, I really believe that the quote-unquote depression and anxiety and all these labels that we have, I just don't feel like we should have them, quite frankly. I know that society has progressed and we have all these labels now, but I just feel like it makes it so much worse. And, I do think there are certain things out there that could be, classified as a technical mental disorder, but I feel like I said before, those are very few and far between, and I think mostly we're just dealing with coping mechanisms. We're dealing with manifestations of what happened during our childhoods, or even as adults, or both, combination of different factors playing in. So ultimately, that was all I really found on that as far as Samson is concerned. So next, we are going to address what I found in regards to bipolar, which was really not hardly anything. There are some people that speculate that Paul had some kind of bipolar thing going on. So, the thing about what I found here is, like I say, it's not a ton of information. But here this says the Bible doesn't specifically say that Paul had any bipolar tendencies. However, Romans 7:21-24, Paul tells of a condition that he was going through. 21, I find then this law in my case. When I wish to do what is right, what is bad is present with me. 22, I really delight in the law of God according to the man I am within. 23, but I see in my body another law warring against the law in my mind, and leading me captive to sin's law that is in my body. 24, miserable man that I am, who will rescue me from the body undergoing this death. The Bible does not say what this condition was, but it could be applied to various illnesses. Regardless of what our illness or problem is, his final words of the chapter give us hope. 25. Thanks to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then with my mind I myself am a slave to God's law, but with my flesh to sin's law. In other words, even though he was going through a trial, like one with bipolar has to, we can give thanks to God because through his Son, he gave us the opportunity to live illness-free forever. So, basically what I get from this, like I say, just my 2 cents, is I don't believe that these verses are talking about bipolar necessarily. And I have my opinions on bipolar too. But I really feel like what he's talking about here, what Paul is talking about in these verses in Romans, I really feel like he is discussing simply a trial of what he's going through in a war within himself. And the bottom line is, we all have wars within ourselves. And sometimes they can be more potent than others, and we go through phases in our lives where we're going to feel like we're having war with ourselves. And especially, followers of Christ, they struggle so much with just generally trying to follow, what's in the Bible and trying to follow Christ and the commandments. And so a lot of people will be at war with themselves and have a really hard time doing these things. And so what he is saying in these verses, I just definitely don't see this as bipolar, and this is just my opinion. And there are some other verses as well, but we're referring to Saul, Paul, the same person. So, then we also have David. Some people speculate that David was bipolar. And yet again, this is another thing that I feel like isn't really, it's like they discuss so much on mental illness, but it's like we've got to stop labeling everything as a freaking mental illness. We just have to stop labeling it. And it should really be a big movement, and that's just my opinion. But so the thing about David is that he had a lot of mood swings, and so that is one reason why some experts, quote unquote experts, try to say that he was bipolar. So why was David given to such extreme mood swings? David is one of the most intriguing and important characters in the entire Bible. He is uniquely called a man after God's own heart. For that reason, he is a man that should be studied, and we can learn a lot from David concerning walking with God. But a close look at David's life and the Psalms he wrote shows that David was given to extreme mood swings. Some days he sounds like he wants to die. Other days he seems like he's on top of the world. Sometimes he comes across depressed and despairing, and at other times so joyful that he's about to burst. Why? Let me answer the question first by telling you a story about a dear Christian brother. So this goes on to kind of like talk about a different story, which I'm not going to get into. So, basically, what this particular article is saying is that life is hard, but God is good. So, what I get from this, from the whole mood swing situation with David, is I really feel that he was just having a lot of different things going on, different days. We're going to feel different on different days. It's actually really not normal to feel exactly the same every day, all the time. And I know that society is constantly trying to tell us that you're supposed to be very content and consistent every single day, day after day, and you're just supposed to feel like I'm good every single day, like everything's good, yeah, like sky's falling down, but everything's good, right? And it's just not realistic. And even in biblical times, and the scriptures that we have tell us so much about how people have struggled over the years, and even thousands and thousands of years ago, before we started labeling these things as mental illness. So I don't believe that David was bipolar. Like I say, I have my opinions on bipolar too, but I believe that he was just simply experiencing different types of emotions. And I know for me, and if you have like a journal or you do like a diary or whatever, like you can see from day to day, you're not the exact same every single day. And it's like I say, society wants to constantly pound into us that we are supposed to be, totally fine all the time. And if we're not, then we're labeled as mentally ill. If you are naturally a high-strung person and you're, kind of like uptight, they label you with anxiety disorder, or, if you have episodes where you have panic attacks, they call that panic disorder. And I've struggled with panic attacks a lot over the course of my life. I do still get them very rarely, but they do still happen on occasion. So that's just something I've dealt with, and that's just a part of who I am. It's a part of how I cope, and everyone is going to cope differently. And if you really wanted to get into labeling, we could label every single person on this planet as mentally ill at some point in their life, at least at this point in time, at least on several occasions throughout the person's life, if not constantly and consistently. So if you really want to get technical and get into labeling, we could label every single person on the planet as being mentally ill, quote unquote. So I just want to get my point across there. So now we are going to talk about anxiety. Okay, so anxiety in the Bible. So I'm not really going to go over like verses necessarily on what the Bible states about anxiety, fear, stress, etc. I'm just simply going to talk about the people that have dealt with this. So there were a few, and in terms of a lot of these people are also people that I mentioned in my video that I did on depression and the Bible characters as well. So a lot of these are going to be repetitive, but many of these people actually most struggled with anxiety and depression type of thing. So therefore, yet again, just another thing that shows us anxiety and depression can definitely go hand in hand, and they are very common. And so I definitely want to point that out as well. Okay, so first of all, we have Job, and Job is perhaps no Bible character has suffered more than Job, and I would have to strongly agree with that. I definitely feel like he suffered more than any other character in the Bible. So David was no stranger to hard times. Moses suffered several instances of hard times. We have Peter, and we have, Martha. So the situation with Martha was, it mostly comes from a scripture in which Jesus came to visit Martha and her sister Mary, and basically Martha was like playing servant, and she was really anxious and just kind of like trying to do all this stuff around the house and trying to be a really good servant, and she was just kind of uptight. And that's where people get that from when they say Martha struggled with anxiety. And you know, I think that Martha was probably just a naturally uptight person, in my opinion. So this says, Martha in Luke 10:40-42, Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me. The Lord said to her in reply, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. So that's the situation with Martha. That's where most biblical experts will get that from that scripture right there. And so with the anxiety in Martha, like, that was just obviously just one situation, but obviously why would we label this as a mental disorder? Why, you know? So Jesus was another. Jesus had dealt with depression and anxiety throughout his ministry. And so he became very perturbed and deeply troubled, and during many situations, actually. So we have Mary and Joseph, and they obviously had a lot of grief and sadness because they were Jesus's parents, his earthly parents, and so obviously they dealt with so much. So at the end of this scripture in Luke 2:46-48, it says, your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety. So they were worried, naturally. They were stressed out trying to find their child, obviously. So there's more here on Jesus, but I'm not going to get into like all of this. So again, we mentioned Peter. Peter was very scared to walk on the water, particularly when Jesus reached out his hand in the sea, ocean, whatever, and wanted Peter to come toward him and walk on the water. And so I think that that's perfectly natural for him to be anxious about walking on the water, naturally. So, servant of the prophet Elisha in 2 Kings. And so the servant, this particular servant was clearly really uptight, and that's a story I'm not going to get into because it's just too long. So, and again, we have Jonah. Obviously, Jonah was inside the whale, and there are even people that speculate that Jonah was bipolar or had something else going on, just because he was having like these weird dreams and things of that nature, seeing interesting things. And I don't really feel like that's the case at all. I feel like it was just all a spiritual experience for him, and that that was something he had to go through to get right with his life. So I don't feel like he really had anything going on other than that. So Jeremiah, again, anxiety and depression for Jeremiah. Job, anxiety and depression. Okay. Next we have Nehemiah. This is one I haven't talked about before. Nehemiah is not talked about a whole lot in the Bible, but does have his own book, Nehemiah. And so he was pretty sad too. There was a lot of sadness going on with him. We have King David. We talked about him. So, and he was really upset when his son died, and he said, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if I had only died instead of you, my son, my son. So, obviously, we're going to be depressed if our kid dies. For sure. Okay, so we have Elijah. We've talked about him. Elijah, anxiety and depression. We see Mordecai and Esther. And so Mordecai and Esther, they were dealing with a lot as well. And this is a common pattern that we see with these characters, is like they're just all going through something that's really intense. They're going through a really difficult time, or something that is just really intense. And so periods of anxiety, periods of depression, sadness, they can definitely vary in length. And sometimes it goes on for a long time. Sometimes it goes on for a short time. And I just simply don't feel like we should be giving people, or that doctors, or psychiatrists, whatever, should be giving people a timeline of how long they should be feeling a certain way. Because everyone is so different, and you don't need to be, medicated or undergo, some kind of treatment just because you're dealing with a certain type of feeling for an extended period of time. And so it's going to look so different for everyone, and obviously everyone has to take charge of their own mental and emotional well-being, and they have to decide what's right for them, whether they want to be on medication to help them feel better, which I've said before, I'm not against that. I am all for doing whatever a person needs to do to be the best version of themselves. So maybe the person decides they want to do therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, go see a therapist. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Maybe they want to handle the situation completely naturally and just, be intuitive and do what they feel like they should do, what they need to do, and just listen to what they need to do to feel better. And naturally, we do have these phases of our lives. We're going to be down, and then we're going to be up, and we're going to be down and up. So, and there are certain mental things that can happen with people as well, in terms of drugs can do a lot of damage, certain types of drugs. Now, I personally, I have my opinions on psychedelics and certain types of quote-unquote drugs that are out there, and I feel like a lot of them can be beneficial, and a lot of studies have shown microdosing certain types of psychedelics can be extremely beneficial to people that have depression, anxiety, etc., anything going on with their mental emotional health. And so that's something I actually really hope to talk about in the future. I'm not sure how far I want to dive into that, because there's so much I could say, and there's so much I would like to say about it from personal experience, but in the same point, I kind of worry about who might see it. So, I really do hope to make some videos on that in the future, and be able to help people further with that, because it's huge. It is so huge. So, anyways, that's something that I will be talking about somewhat, maybe in remnants at a time, we'll see. So we also have Naomi and Ruth, and I believe I talked about this in the depression video I did recently as well, but yeah, so Naomi and Ruth, the situation, so Ruth was getting older, and, Naomi was getting older, and Ruth, her daughter-in-law, decided to stay with her because Naomi had lost her husband and both of her sons, and she was alone, and she was getting older, and she could not support herself. So Ruth decided to stay with her and take care of her. And so basically they kind of had to really just put their faith in God, because they didn't have enough. They didn't know where they were going to get their food. They didn't know how they were going to make it, essentially. And so anyways, so Ruth ended up marrying Boaz. Boaz. And but there was a lot of stress, anxiety, and uptightness that went along with that story to an extent. And then of course Ruth and Naomi both were depressed upon losing people that they loved. And the same with Orpha. Orpha was the other daughter-in-law, and she decided to go back to her hometown, I think it was. So those are some examples. And so essentially most of these people that I'm talking about in the Bible, most of them were also dealing with depression. So like I say, this tells us a lot. It really does, if you really think about it. Especially if you are a Christian, if you do consider yourself. I personally, I'm just a non-denominational Christian. I believe in Christianity, but I also believe in truth in other religions as well. I pretty much believe that there's some truth in every religion. And so, except like anything crazy like Satanism or, I definitely don't believe in anything like that that's like dark. But I believe there's some truth in Hinduism, Islam. I believe there's some truth in Buddhism, which is not really religion, it's a way of life. But there are so many out there, and I think, excuse me, that there is something to be taken out of all of them. And so I kind of just combine everything together. But primarily, yes, I'm a non-denominational Christian. So, but yeah, I mean, there's so much information. Paul and who else? I think there was one more that I was going to mention. Or not. Okay. And Queen Esther was anxious because she was planning to risk her life on behalf of her people. Fear of death and the unknown is a key element of anxiety. So, yeah, so the situation with Esther was she actually, she really went out of her way to help her people. And her story is really just it's a very inspiring, very beautiful story, the story of Esther. But so she ended up having to worry about essentially being killed for what she was doing. She risked her life. And obviously in that situation, I can't imagine being so scared and so scared. But that's really about all I'm going to say about these characters because I'm already kind of far in here. But like I say, those are just some examples. And so, it's interesting because it's like when I was looking up all this information and Googling all of these things, like all these characters and their situations, their personal situations that they went through, it was like all these articles were saying like biblical characters who dealt with mental illness, struggled with this disorder or that disorder, Excuse me, guys. I don't know why I'm coughing. Allergies here like crazy, but... And so, upon seeing these articles and seeing the way that people want to label these situations and label these people as having mental illness, I just don't see that that's accurate at all. And I feel like the same is today. And the way that people try so hard to label people as, having a mental illness when they're just going through something. And it's like, if we really just look at it for what it is, we see that, But a lot of people, hopefully that's the last cough. A lot of people, sadly, don't see it that way. And a lot of people believe that they are, in fact, mentally ill. So I just want to put that out for you guys today. And I really hope that this helps someone. And I know that this perspective has changed my life so much, and I could not be any more thankful to just legitimately just be where I am and have an understanding that, hey, I'm not mentally ill, and I never was. And I just wish that the me now could have known back then and told the old me that, hey, there's actually nothing wrong with you. You're actually okay. You're actually just dealing with this and this and this and this. And I just wish that I could have realized that. But, the older we get, the more we know, the more we understand. And so I do hope some other people will see it from my perspective, and I know that obviously not everyone will agree with my perspective because, again, I am not any kind of licensed professional, but I am someone that has struggled with the quote-unquote anxiety, depression, panic, and again, PTSD. That's something I haven't talked about in this video, but I was diagnosed with PTSD. But I think the thing about PTSD too is, like, obviously when you go through something that's very traumatic, you are going to have certain memories stored of that experience. And that's what PTSD is just simply, certain cells in your body hold on to these memories. And so there's always going to be a part of that within you, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter what medication you take, how much therapy you do. Not saying it's not going to get better, but because it does, it definitely does, especially if you put the work in. But what I'm trying to say is that a traumatic experience is going to stick with you to an extent for the rest of your life, and there's nothing you can do to erase it. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it. It's just always going to be there a little bit, and that's part of you, but that's part of what makes you who you are. And so I feel like it's important to note that as well, even though I did not really talk about PTSD in this video. So, and it's kind of hard for me to keep calling everything, these labels, because I don't want to title them as labels, but for the sake of everyone trying to understand what I'm saying to an extent, that's why I still keep saying this, anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar, whatever. But yeah, so anyways, if you guys want to know anything else, you want me to deep dive into some other little subcategories of mental and emotional wellness, definitely let me know. And we will certainly discuss that. So I will have more mental health and emotional health and wellness videos coming in the future, of course. This is one of my favorite topics, and I'm definitely going to continue to do videos on this, as well as occasional homeschool videos. Of course, I do a lot of videos on vitamins, supplements, some on skincare and hair care, different products I like to review, etc. And then obviously I like to upload a lot of nature shorts and a lot of just my my travel experiences and my different experiences with nature and all of that. So anything I feel like is cool to me, I upload it because I just feel like, this is my channel, it's about me and my life. So anyways, but I do hope that you guys enjoy this video. It's a little bit longer than I intended, but I love you all, and I will see you in my next one. So talk later. Bye guys.